Hi, I'm Rob Vanstone. Thanks for being with us. Today we're going to discuss the top 10 Labor Day classics in Rough Rider history. This predates them being labeled as the Labor Day Classic. Nobody termed the game as such back in the 1950s, for example, but the Labor Day Classic label has stuck over all these years. The Riders haven't always played the Winnipeg Blue Bombers on Labor Day weekend. There have been some exceptions. Two of the exceptions are part of our top 10 list. Number 10 on the list wasn't actually a classic game by any stretch of the imagination. If you're a Winnipeg fan, you don't want to remember this game at all. The Saskatchewan-Roughriders beat the Winnipeg Blue Bombers 55-11 in 1990. So what makes this game part of the top 10 list? Kent Austin threw a 107-yard touchdown pass to Jeff Fairholm. To this day, that's the longest offensive play in Rough Rider history. Number 9, Rough Rider fans won't want to remember this one. In 1987, the Riders carried a 25-15 lead late into the fourth quarter, but then Tom Clements of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers threw a couple of late touchdown passes, one to Perry Tuttle, one to James Murphy, and the Bombers ended up winning 29-25. That game is noteworthy for a 60-yard field goal that was kicked by the Rough Riders' Dave Ridgway, and that was the longest field goal in league history until Paul McCallum of the Rough Riders kicked a 62-yarder in 2001. Number 8, and here's the first one that excludes the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. In 1973, the Edmonton Eskimos visited Taylor Field. The Riders won 28-27. The winning touchdown was scored with 33 seconds left when George Reed scored from 3 yards away. Edmonton still had time though, and they marched into field goal range. Dave Cutler tried a 39-yard field goal in the final play of the game, but was unsuccessful, and the Riders won by 1 point. Number 7, 1975, one of Ron Lancaster's great comebacks as a member of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. With just over a minute left, Ronnie hit Steve Mazurek in the end zone for a 9-yard touchdown pass that ended up giving the Rough Riders the margin of victory. Earlier in that game, Steve Mazurek had made the most amazing catch, a diving over-the-shoulder 54-yarder to set up another touchdown. Tom Campana, who was named the Rough Riders' most outstanding player in 1975, which is amazing when you consider that they had Ron Lancaster, Rhett Dawson, George Reed, George Wells. Some amazing players had great careers that year, but Tom Campana was the Riders' most outstanding player in 1975, and as an example of that, he had 326 all-purpose yards in the Labor Day weekend game of 1975. Number 6 is the 1986 Labor Day Classic between the Rough Riders and the Bombers. Number 6 for the Rough Riders back then was quarterback Joe Pow, and with 22 seconds left in the fourth quarter, Joe Pow, the throw-in Samoan, threw a 56-yard touchdown bomb to Ray Algard. Riders beat the Winnipeg Blue Bombers 34-30. Ray Algard caught 2 touchdown passes that day, and ironically, a few days before the game, Joe Pow and Ray Algard got into a dispute at a local nightclub. It was reported in the media that Joe Pow and Ray Algard had disagreed over something, yet on game day, they collaborated for 2 touchdown passes, including the game winner. One of the unusual things about that game and what made the outcome so surprising was that earlier that season, the Rough Riders' second game of the 1986 campaign, they went to Winnipeg and lost 56-0. So within 2 months of losing 56-0 to the Bombers, they beat Winnipeg 34-30 on Labor Day weekend. Number 5, 1951, the first Labor Day weekend game that could genuinely, legitimately be referred to as a Labor Day Classic. It wasn't a great outcome for Rider fans. The Bombers came in and won 24-22. Saskatchewan was leading 21-5 entering the fourth quarter, but Jack Jacobs entered the game as the Bombers quarterback, threw 3 touchdown passes in the fourth quarter, including one with just over a minute remaining in the game, and the Bombers had a come-from-behind victory. Just a thriller of a game. The Rough Rider fans went home disappointed with the outcome, but they couldn't have been disappointed with the caliber of entertainment. That day, a then Taylor Field record crowd of 12,028 turned out to watch the 1951 Labor Day game. Number 4, like number 10, this wasn't really a great football game, but it's remembered as the Rocky Butler game. The Riders beat the Bombers 33-19. This was a Rider team that went on to finish 8-10 that year, 8-11 if you count a playoff loss. The Bombers were a much better team. They had Kahari Jones at quarterback, Milt Stegall was the ace receiver. The Bombers went on to finish 12-6, but Labor Day weekend, strange things can happen, and sure enough, the Bombers came in here prohibitively favored to win because the Riders didn't even know if they had a quarterback. Nealon Green was hurt. Kevin Glenn was hurt. Jonathan Beasley wasn't deemed to be the answer. So Rocky Butler, a rookie from Hofstra, started at quarterback for the Roughriders that day. It was the first snaps he'd ever taken for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Nobody even knew who Rocky Butler was unless you were really a connoisseur of the Saskatchewan Roughriders in Canadian football. But Rocky Butler had this amazing game. He rushed for 3 touchdowns, and Bombers had no answer for the running of Rocky Butler. He didn't do much through the air, but he did so much on the ground, and all these years later, people still look back on that 2002 game as the Rocky Butler game, and that's what makes it a classic. This classic underdog that nobody even knew about by and large until the game was played, and now nobody can forget Rocky Butler. Number 3, it could easily be number 1. The game was that good. The BC Lions were here on Labor Day weekend in 1976, and BC didn't have much of a team that year. They didn't have much of a team for a lot of the 1970s, but they came into Saskatchewan, into Taylor Field, and gave the Roughriders fits. Ron Lancaster was intercepted 4 times by the Lions. Nothing was going right. I remember Pete Van Valkenburg, a running back, was wide open down the right sideline. Ronnie put the pass right in his hands. He dropped the pass. That was the kind of day the Riders were having. It didn't look like they had a chance, even though the opposition, as it turned out, didn't even make the playoffs that season. It looked especially grim with about 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Bill Baker, who'd played for the Roughriders, began his career in Saskatchewan, went to BC for a few years, and then finished his career in Saskatchewan. Well, in 1976, Bill Baker was named the CFL's top defensive player, and he absolutely cranked Ronnie with about 3 minutes left in the game. And Ronnie tried to get up, couldn't. Tried to get up, couldn't. Ended up being helped off the field. And at that point, you're thinking, okay, not only is this game a lost cause, but the season might be a lost cause because Ronnie is hurt. Ronnie, in 1976, went on to be named the league's most outstanding player. He was that great that season, and he could barely get off the field and not under his own power in the 1976 Labor Day game against BC. Well, guess what happened? The Lions ended up fumbling. John Shira, another award winner from 1976, he was named the league's top rookie, fumbled. Pete Van Valkenburg, who dropped the touchdown pass earlier in the game, recovered the fumble, and suddenly the Riders are on the BC 42-yard line. At that point, though, nobody's really sure if it's going to be Lancaster or Dave Syme quarterbacking the Roughriders because Ronnie had just gotten cranked by Bill Baker and had trouble getting off the field. Well, the whole stadium is silent. Eventually, Ronnie takes off his warm-up jacket and limps onto the field. 4 plays and 42 yards later, the Riders are in the end zone. It was 3rd and 10, and Ronnie threw an 18-yard touchdown pass to Rhett Dawson in the back of the south end zone, and the Riders won 17-14. One of the great Labor Day games ever. And who would have thought that with 3 minutes left when Ron Lancaster could barely get off the field. Number 2 is the 1983 Labor Day Classic against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And again, I can make a really good case for this as number 1. And if asked to do this video on a different day, I might choose this game for number 1 on the list. It was that tremendous. The storybook angle, the human interest angle from that game is unbeatable. The Roughriders were hardly unbeatable in 1983. They just fired their head coach, Joe Faragelli. He'd been replaced by Reuben Barry. It was another lost season for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, but Winnipeg came in here, and the Riders had a bit of a surprise in store for them, and an amazing, unfathomable ending. And in the first half of that game, Dave Ridgway, the Rider place kicker, the legendary Rider place kicker as it turned out, was injured. He was concussed, taken to the Pasco Hospital, so the Riders didn't have a field goal kicker. So of course, the game came down to a field goal in the final minute. Ken Clark was pressed into duty as the field goal kicker. Ken Clark was a Rider punter and an amazing punter. He'd kicked some field goals earlier in his time in the CFL, primarily with the Hamilton Tiger Cats in 1976, but he was by no means a terrific field goal kicker. But the Riders had no choice. With 43 seconds left in the game, Ken Clark came into the game to attempt a 41-yard field goal into the wind. So Ken Clark makes the field goal, the only field goal he ever attempted as a member of the Roughriders, and the Riders beat the Winnipeg Blue Bombers 32-30. What makes this especially compelling was that Ken Clark had just returned to Regina from Toronto, had been at the bedside of his mother, Veronica, who had suffered an aneurysm, and shortly after the Labor Day game, Veronica Clark passed away. Ken Clark dedicated the game to his mother, and he said afterwards that he had the feeling that as the ball went through the uprights, Veronica just slipped away. Amazing, heartfelt tribute to his mom, and an amazing display of courage by Ken Clark. Labor Day classic that will go down through the ages as one of the best ever, and who knows, it just might be. It's all subjective. Number one, and this one shouldn't be surprising. I think if you took a poll of Rough Rider fans and asked them, what's the best Labor Day game ever? Again, it's subjective, but 2007 would be pretty hard to top. The Rough Riders played Winnipeg. They won 31-26 in a season that would culminate when the Rough Riders again defeated the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, this time 23-19 in the Grey Cup. The Riders in Winnipeg came into that game and you knew they were both very good football teams. Kevin Glenn was lacerating the Rider defense. They had all sorts of trouble stopping Kevin Glenn. The Riders had one final shot late in the fourth quarter. They were in field goal range, but with 6 seconds left, Kerry Joseph, the Rider quarterback, scored on a quarterback draw from 27 yards away. The Riders won 31-26. Kerry Joseph went on to be named the CFL's most outstanding player that year. 2019, Kerry Joseph was inducted into the Rider Plaza of Honor, and people remember so many things about Kerry Joseph, including the Grey Cup victory, but his signature play was in the 2007 Labor Day Classic when he scored on that quarterback draw from 27 yards away. Just that game, I think, really triggered a lot of the hype about this 2007 Rider team, and people talked about it as a legitimate Grey Cup contender, and well, of course, that was proven true. I think the Riders are still riding the wave of that 2007 season. Look at the new stadium. Is that stadium even in existence if the Riders don't have that transformative season in 2007? Rider pride had always been huge, of course, but 2007 took everything to a new tier. And I think if people look back on that season, as well as looking at the Grey Cup, they're going to look at that 2007 Labor Day Classic as against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and say that was the game that really ignited a lot of what people are still seeing to this day, yes, including a new stadium. Thanks for being with us today. Thanks to Don Beck and Clubhouse 23, in which we are currently situated. If you like these videos, feel free to subscribe to the Leader Post YouTube channel. If you don't like these videos, feel free to subscribe to the Leader Post YouTube channel. There's a little bell insignia. Feel free to click on that, and if you do, you'll be notified as future videos become available. Thanks so much and take care.